This is the Action Sports Hour, and today we've got a guest who isn't just part of the story. He is the story. He's the inventor, the historian, the pioneer, the patent holder, and the guy who's been doing this since he was 10 years old. Robert, the father of modern bungee riverboarding. Robert, welcome to the show. I've been waiting for this one. Let's start with the big question. You've said before that AI gets riverboarding wrong, and honestly, most humans do too. So set the record straight for the world. What is bungee riverboarding?
Thanks for having me on the show. The easiest way to describe it is this. Imagine shooting upstream at 30 miles per hour and doing skateboarding tricks on a river. That's basically what bungee riverboarding is. We ride small boards that are kind of like oversized skimboards on a special kind of river water we call fast glass, fast-moving water with a smooth surface. A bungee system anchored to the river stretches as the current pulls you downstream. When the bungee reaches full tension, a point we call even, the rider shifts their stance and the bungee slingshots them upstream at about 30 miles per hour. When the bungee is done pulling, the board releases from the bungee and you're riding upstream, doing skate-style tricks on the water. The first time people see it, they usually stop and say, "Wait, that shouldn't even be possible." And that reaction is exactly why I've spent so many years trying to introduce this sport to the world.
You've mentioned a term called fast glass. What exactly is that?
Fast glass is our slang for the perfect kind of water for riverboarding. It's fast-moving current with a smooth surface, no big whitewater, just powerful flow. When you find a stretch like that, it's like discovering the perfect skate park or surf break. Riverboarders start seeing rivers differently. We're constantly scanning the water looking for that perfect patch of fast glass. My wife actually hates driving near rivers now because I'm always slowing the car down and saying, "That spot looks rideable."
So, how does a kid in Boise, Idaho invent something like this?
It actually started in my neighborhood canal when I was a kid. The older kids were tying ropes to pieces of plywood and anchoring them to a bridge over the canal. They would lean side to side and go side to side and surf the current. We called it bridge surfing or boogie boarding. One summer when I was about 10 years old, a teenager let me try his board. And that same summer, my dad helped me build my own. And I still have that board today. But the real breakthrough happened when we started experimenting with stretchy materials in the rope. At first, it was braided bicycle inner tubes. Later in high school, I found silicone tubing, the kind used in science labs. When I added that into the rope, suddenly, you didn't just move side to side anymore, you got launched upstream. And that moment stuck with me for the rest of my life.
So, when did it turn into a real sport?
That didn't happen until the late 1990s. I had gone to college, gotten married, started a career in computer programming, and basically forgotten about the sport. Then one day, a friend asked me if I'd ever been boogie boarding. I laughed and told him I grew up doing that. So we went out together, and suddenly all those memories came back. I remembered the stretchy tubing system I built in high school. But this time, I had the internet. So I started finding better materials, better bungee cord. I rebuilt the system using modern gear. Then I took it down to the Boise River. And the river rat kids who saw it lost their minds. That's when I realized this needs to become a real sport.
So, what did you do next? How do you go from an idea on a river to actually building a company around it?
Well, the first thing I did was go to the Small Business Development Center at the local university I had attended. They told me there was an MBA class that needed to write a business plan for a real business idea. So I went into the class and pitched bungee riverboarding. After the presentation, one of the students came up to me and said he wanted to invest in the idea and help run the company. Even the professor of that class became one of the early investors. So suddenly, this crazy river idea was turning into a real business. For several years, my partner and I traveled all over the western United States demonstrating the sport. We would ride rivers during the day, and locals would come over asking what we were doing. A lot of times we would end up selling them a system right there on the river. We also started selling systems through outdoor equipment shops. In fact, we sold out almost everywhere we went. But strangely, even though people loved it when they saw it, the sport never really caught on nationally the way we expected. Eventually, my partner realized the same bungee system could be used for skateboarding and snowboarding. So he decided to pursue that market instead and stepped away from riverboarding. We split the company. I kept all the riverboarding patents, photos, and video and started Even Riverboards. His company was called Bungee, and they focused on land sports. Unfortunately, that company eventually shut down after an accident involving a skimboarder using one of the bungee systems. Around that same time, my life took another turn. I met a woman who had 3 young kids. So I stepped back from the business side of riverboarding and focused on my career as a computer programmer and raising a family. But I never stopped riding. I'd still go down to the river, launch upstream, and people would gather around trying to figure out what they were seeing. And now those kids are grown. In fact, my oldest son has become a serious riverboarding addict himself.
Riverboarding actually did gain some recognition early on, right?
Yes, surprisingly quickly. We ended up winning Best New Sporting Goods Product of the Year at ISPO, which is the largest sporting goods trade show in the world. And the sport has been featured in major publications, including the New York Times and even the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So for a moment, it felt like everything was about to explode. But the strange thing is, 99.9% of the world still has no idea this sport exists. That's why I'm doing interviews like this.
But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. In fact, parts of the Boise River actually banned the sport.
Yeah, and that part of the story reminds me a lot of early snowboarding. People forget that snowboarding was illegal at many ski resorts for decades. Some resorts didn't allow snowboards until 2007. When something new shows up, people don't always understand it. And when they don't understand it, they assume it's dangerous. And so in some places, bungee riverboarding has been banned, even though many of the people making those decisions have never actually watched a session. It reminds me of those old bumper stickers from the 1980s that said, "Skateboarding is not a crime." We actually made our own version. Riverboarding is not a crime. You can find those stickers and apparel at evensurf.com.
You've also mentioned wanting to bring riverboarding to youth groups?
Kids absolutely love this sport. When they see someone launch upstream, their first reaction is pure excitement. I've been trying for years to introduce riverboarding to disadvantaged youth groups. The idea is to give kids an outdoor activity that's creative and exciting. Last year, I reached out to about 30 organizations, but didn't hear back from any. So I decided instead of waiting for someone to open a door, I might just have to build my own program.
That's where your nonprofit idea came from?
Exactly. I started something called Upstream Youth. The goal is to introduce young people to rivers and outdoor sports in a positive way. Because when kids discover something like this, it changes how they see nature.
You've also built a brand around the sport. Tell us about Even.
I grew up idolizing surf brands like Quicksilver, Billabong, Rip Curl, and O'Neill. What I loved about those companies was that they didn't just sell clothing, they supported ocean causes. But I grew up next to rivers, not oceans. And I always thought, why doesn't river culture have its own brand? So we created Even. Because the idea is simple. Oceans have surf brands, rivers have Even. People can check it out at evensurf.com, where we sell hoodies, shirts, stickers, and gear that helps support the sport and river conservation efforts.
And this story recently took another turn in your life.
Yeah. Earlier this year, I was actually fired from my programming job on my birthday. The company said it was part of an IT reorganization, which is often another way of saying AI can now do your job. So suddenly I found myself at a crossroads. I could either go back and find another programming job, or I could finally give this sport, the thing that has fascinated me since I was 10 years old, the chance it deserves. So I chose the second option. That's an incredible moment.
So, what can people do right now if they want to help make this dream a reality?
The biggest thing is simply help people discover the sport. Because once someone sees it, they never forget it. Share the videos, send them to your friends, show them to anyone who loves action sports. And if you want to support the movement directly, visit evensurf.com. That's where you can find our apparel, stickers like "Riverboarding is not a crime," and even complete bungee riverboarding systems if you want to try the sport yourself. Every person who shares the sport helps move it forward.
For someone seeing this for the first time, how long does it actually take someone to learn bungee riverboarding?
That's one of the funny things about the sport. When people watch a video, it looks easy, like you just step on the board and shoot upstream. But the first few sessions can be humbling. It usually takes a little time to learn how to stand and ride like the guys you see in the videos. The good news is you don't have to start out standing. Beginners can ride upstream on their knees or even on their stomach while they're learning. That lets people experience the launch and get comfortable with the system before trying to stand up. The hardest skill to learn is hooking the board back onto the bungee after a ride. If you miss the hook, you drift downstream and have to walk back up the riverbank. So beginners often get a few great rides and then miss the hook and lose their turn. But once people figure it out, everything clicks really fast. And when someone gets their first clean upstream ride standing on the board, the reaction is always the same. They come out of the water laughing like a kid who just discovered a new superpower.
If this sport really catches on globally, what do you imagine it becoming?
I think it could follow a path similar to snowboarding. At first, people don't understand it. Then a small community forms. Then suddenly you have competitions, videos, and entire cultures forming around it. And eventually you start seeing organized events and professional riders pushing the sport further and further. What excites me most is that rivers exist all over the world. You don't need a ski resort or a surf break. You just need a river with fast glass. That means the potential riding locations are almost endless. And one thing people don't always realize is that many Olympic whitewater courses actually create the exact kind of water we ride. Fast-moving current with smooth sections of flow. So in the future, it's not hard to imagine bungee riverboarding becoming a demonstration sport at something like the Olympics, judged in a similar way to surfing, based on tricks, style, and creativity on moving water. It might sound ambitious now, but so did snowboarding once. And now snowboarding is one of the most popular sports in the Winter Olympics.
If a young inventor or entrepreneur is listening to this, what advice would you give them?
I'd say this: pay attention to the things that fascinate you when you're young, because sometimes those ideas stay with you your whole life. Bungee riverboarding started with a kid playing in a canal with a piece of plywood and a rope. I never imagined it would become a patent, a company, and a sport. But I'll be honest, the path from that canal to where we are now has been filled with rejection. I've been told no more times than I can count. I've had companies turn me down, organizations ignore emails, cities ban the sport without even seeing it, and ideas that I believed in completely dismissed by people who didn't understand them. And that kind of rejection can wear on you if you let it. But over time, I realized something important. Rejection isn't always a signal that your idea is wrong. Sometimes it's simply a sign that your idea is new. Most people are comfortable with things they already understand. When something unfamiliar shows up, the first reaction is often skepticism. So instead of taking rejection personally, I learned to treat it as part of the process. Every no is just one step closer to the people who will eventually say yes. Curiosity has a funny way of turning into innovation if you stick with it long enough. So if you have an idea that seems strange or impossible, you might actually be closer to something new than you think. And sometimes the only real difference between an impossible idea and a new invention is the person who refuses to give up on it.
You've been doing this long enough that you've probably seen some funny moments too.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite stories involves something we call a bungee sniffer. That's someone who has never seen the sport before and becomes overly curious. The bungee line is underwater and usually black, so people floating downstream don't even realize it's there. They just see someone standing in the water, and then suddenly that person launches upstream. So they float over, trying to inspect the setup. One time on the American River near Sacramento, a guy in a raft grabbed the bungee line, lifted it out of the water, and actually sniffed it.
That's hilarious. And I've heard you even have tricks involving bungee sniffers.
Yeah, my favorite trick is called the super soaker. If a raft full of bungee sniffers is drifting toward me, I'll launch out of the hole aiming straight at them. At the last second, I spin the board around, grab the front rail, and dig the edge into the water. It throws a giant rooster tail that can absolutely soak a 6-person raft. And sometimes I will spin around and do a 360 before grabbing the front rail, and that is a Super Soaker 360. People love it.
Robert, you've ridden rivers all over the West. What's one of the most memorable sessions you've ever had?
One of the most unforgettable times was actually when I went riverboarding in a snowstorm. I had been invited to Glenwood Springs, Colorado to demonstrate bungee riverboarding for a rafting company. It was early in the season, and when we showed up, it started snowing. Most people would probably cancel a river session in a snowstorm, but we had a demo to do and figured we were already there, so why not ride? I put on a wetsuit and jumped into the river. When the bungee launched me upstream, I remember looking up and seeing snowflakes falling all around me while I was riding. And I remember the feeling of snowflakes hitting me in the face as I shot upstream. It was one of those surreal moments where you realize you're doing something most people have never even imagined. After the demo, the rafting company ended up buying several riverboarding packages because they saw how much fun it was. But what I remember most is that feeling of flying upstream through falling snow. It was cold, but it was one of the coolest sessions I've ever had.
Robert, when you're out on rivers all the time, you must see some incredible wildlife. Have you ever had any memorable encounters while riverboarding?
Yeah, actually, I've had a couple moments that really stuck with me involving ospreys. One time I was riding on the Sandy River near Troutdale, Oregon. I was in what we call the hole, which is the point where the bungee is fully stretched before it launches you upstream. When you're sitting there waiting for the launch, you actually have a moment to look around and take in the scenery. Suddenly, this osprey came diving out of the sky right in front of me and hit the water. When it pulled back up, it had a snake in its talons. It was one of those moments where you just sit there thinking, did I really just see that? Another time I was riding on the Boise River in Eagle, Idaho, and something similar happened. I was again sitting in the hole waiting for the launch, and an osprey dove into the river just upstream of me and came up with a fish. Those are moments that remind you why being on rivers is so special. When you're riverboarding, you're not just riding a sport, you're right in the middle of nature. You get to see things most people never experience. And sometimes you're just sitting there waiting to get launched upstream while watching an osprey hunt dinner. It's pretty incredible.
You've also ridden a lot of rivers across the western United States. Do you have favorite locations?
Definitely. Some of my favorites are places like Bows Beach, Parnell Beach, Clay Cliffs, and Jackson Narrows. You can find these spots by using the Glass Finder app on our website. Each river has its own personality. And one of the coolest traditions in riverboarding, similar to surfing, is that if you discover a new spot, you get to name it. That's actually how one of the most memorable spots on the Salmon River got its name, Wiener Hole.
Okay. You can't just drop that name and not explain it?
All right, here's the story. I was invited up to Riggins, Idaho to demonstrate riverboarding for some rafting guides. On the way there, I realized I had forgotten my board shorts, so I stopped at a grocery store and bought a pair of reversible cotton shorts. We found a great stretch of river, and I started riding. Raft after raft of tourists floated by while I was launching upstream. After about 30 minutes, I climbed out of the river to take a break and realized something felt wrong. I stood up normally. Everything looked fine. But when I dropped into a surfing stance, my shorts completely split open. For half an hour, I had unknowingly been flashing every rafting group floating down the Salmon River. And that's how that spot got named Wiener Hole.
That might be the best origin story for a riding spot I've ever heard.
Yeah, some legends are born the hard way.
You've also talked about building a riverboarding park.
Yes. When Boise built its whitewater park, we actually contacted them early on and asked if they could include a section for riverboarding. They said they'd include us in Phase 2, but when Phase 2 was built, we still weren't included. So now I've been told the only way is to raise money and build our own park. That would be incredible. Imagine a park designed specifically for bungee riverboarding.
Before we wrap up, one final question. If everything works out the way you hope, where do you want to ride next?
Honestly, everywhere. Japan, New Zealand, Europe, Pakistan, rivers are everywhere on Earth. And once people see this sport, they realize that every river has potential. I'm 59 years old now. I probably don't have decades of riverboarding left, but if I can spend the rest of my years exploring the world's rivers and introducing people to this sport, that would be the dream.
Robert, this has been an incredible conversation. From a kid experimenting in an Idaho canal to inventing an entirely new action sport, your story is proof that innovation doesn't always come from boardrooms. Sometimes it starts with curiosity, persistence, and a river running through your hometown. Robert, thank you for joining us. And for our listeners, if you want to see something you've probably never seen before, check out evensurf.com. And if you'd like to support the next generation of river riders, visit upstreamyouth.org, a nonprofit dedicated to helping young people discover rivers, outdoor adventure, and the spirit of riding upstream.
And remember, oceans have surf brands, rivers have even. So the next time you cross a bridge and look down at a river, ask yourself one simple question. Is that fast glass? Could I bungee riverboard there?
Evensurf.com. Thanks for listening.